So Brian, I always joke about this, but I hate the intros. So I listen to a lot of podcasts, and like the rambling intro or like the over scripted intro is not my favorite. So I normally try and get through the first part.
Stephen, just read the intro, man. Just read it word for
I
word.
don't.
Just
No, I'm not going to do it.
you got to do it. It's good.
Really?
Just read
Is
it,
it
dude.
good?
Yeah, it's good.
All right. All right. Well, welcome back to Construction Conversations. Today's guest is Brian Skripac, a longtime champion of BIM collaboration. See, it doesn't work, Lars. I can't read a script.
Hey, but Stephen, you tried it, so
Tried.
good job, buddy.
I
Good
can't
job.
write. But
So
listen, I
yeah,
am I am happy to have Brian Skripac from the DBIA. He's the director of virtual design and construction. Welcome, Brian. How you doing, man?
Good to be here. Thanks, Stephen. Thank you, Lars.
So, Lars, did you just find a bunch of construction materials to, like, set your desk up in front of
I'm on a
for this
mission. Just
podcast?
like so, here's the deal. You find podcast introductions boring. I find the
Yeah.
same background pretty boring. So I'm on
You
a
just have
mission
to have
to
a
have
new
a
one.
different, real
Yeah.
background every podcast from here on out. We'll see.
I'm gonna start piping in job site noises so I sound even more like official and authentic. But Brian, we are excited to have you. I think you and I touched base maybe a couple years ago when I was in R&D and
Yep.
really doing some research around the impacts of different kind of construction methods or contract structures. And I was kind of fascinated by your background, but also kind of your journey from you were on the architecture side and then you went into kind of an association with DBIA. So I think what maybe as a first question, kind of what first drew you into the built environment? Like how did you get started? Did you go to school for it? Then you kind of followed that path, or what was your kind of origin story?
Yeah, I went to school for architecture, so you can start there. But before that, well, my dad was a carpenter.
Okay.
My mom's uncle was a contractor. I was always around building stuff. That kind of traditional, that was an environment I was always around and found it to be interesting. Went to school for architecture, went to a very theory-based school at Ohio State, and I always enjoyed my,
Brian, hold on one second. Is it Ohio State, which is what you just referred to it as, or is it? Is it the Ohio State?
it is the Ohio State
Okay,
University,
okay.
but I
I just
didn't want
wasn't
to
sure.
be too over the top and just be,
Okay, okay,
generic
okay.
Ohio State.
I mean, once you start doing the O and the I, then we'll have to pause
We
and
can,
and
we can do the stadium chant if you want. I mean, I don't know if you guys are into that, but I know
I mean, I
everybody
support the Big
else, so we can
Ten.
figure it out.
Yeah, I like that.
So I did go to the Ohio State University, the Knowlton School of Architecture to be exact. We went through, it was a, interesting opportunity. I changed the way I thought about things, right? I was building office buildings. I was around my dad, uncle, like building office buildings, wood frame construction, nothing, like not really in a design focus, but I always found myself being, maybe a little bit more interested in the technical aspects of it. And, coming out of school, looking at construction, being more of a technical architect in my time that I was practicing. That's where I was kind of interested. And then, looking to do something different in my career, I kind of took the tangent back in '05. And that's where I started, playing around with some of these tools and technologies. And that's really where it kind of caught me is, there's a new way of doing things, right? How do we change the way, drawing things and redoing things and reworking things and not really being able to truly visualize what you're doing? That's really where I kind of caught my interest. So yeah, I had kind of a weird path to get to where I am, but it's also been one that's been valuable and taught me a lot of different perspectives that are valuable today.
Love that. So when you look at maybe the career shift from architecture to maybe like industry advocacy, I think we're kind of used to the role in which some associations play and kind of driving maybe industry change. But the DBIA does that in a number of ways, but also kind of supports a very specific contract structure. But when you think about that association and then you think about kind of the role of BIM VDC within that, how does BIM VDC kind of fit within that umbrella of that association for DBIA?
Yeah, I think it's interesting in the roles that I had before, really, at a firm called Astorino when I relocated from Columbus here to Pittsburgh. That's where I first really got a flavor and understanding of how design build really worked differently. That was back in 2012. The first project I worked on was a medical office building. It was about 150, 170,000 square feet. We did it in 20 months. All these outpatient services, we flew through it. But at Astorino, we were the architect, the engineer, and the builder. And so we were kind of this sole source delivery that we brought to the owner, and seeing how everybody was able to interact was really eye-opening, an interesting opportunity. So when you think about how other organizations, many other industry organizations are really focused on the profession or one segment of it, DBIA is really unique in the fact that we have, while we're promoting design build as an ideal way to collaborate and, develop the built environment, we have the opportunity through our membership and all the participation and attendance that we have at events are people who are focused on collaborating, finding a better way to do things than that traditional confrontational, design bid build scenario, right? These are people who are embracing collaboration, want to work more collaboratively, want to deliver success, for the project and the owner that they're working for. And I think one of the things that always drove me nuts on the practice side was how many conversations we have about, design bid build. You do the project in BIM, you create your construction documents, you turn it out, it goes out to bid, low bid comes in, and the contractor says, "Hey, can we have the model?" No, you can't have that, right? That's like the worst. That's like the cyclical thing that always happens, right? You count on that question coming in, and the response is no. Why are we doing this? Why are we choosing to not collaborate and work more effectively together? And I think that, breaking down of those contractual silos that you have in design build is an ideal scenario to promote how we can work together. Technology is allowing us to do great things, but if it's only benefiting one little segment of the industry, it's not moving the industry forward, right? It's, architects may be doing something better, contractors are doing something better, engineers might be doing something better. What if we put all that together and really deliver some stellar projects?
So I've worked on a number of design build projects, and I was actually I'm forgetting the certification type. Is it DVIA Associate? Is that a thing?
Yeah, there's an associate DBIA and then a full DBIA credential. Yeah.
I wasn't full. I was just a partial
Maybe one day,
DPIA.
Stephen. Maybe
Maybe
one day.
one day. I aspire to that. But I think from the GC angle, I think if people are putting on maybe a cynical lens, I think the vision of a design build project, I think is really positive. People want to collaborate. But I think as it relates to the relationship between the GC and the architect, at times it can feel like the architect is maybe responsible for even less, and GCs are having to come even farther upstream in terms of means and methods and constructability in and baking that into the design. And we're going deep, and I'm sorry, this is early to go this deep, but like I want to get your perspective on that kind of equation from an architect standpoint and how they navigate maybe identifying kind of design intent that does enable the project, kind of fits into that collaborative narrative.
Well, I think, and I'll take this from my experience and, the way that some of my early experiences and projects were framed. What design professional does not want to spend more of their time on design and less time on, the details and the minutia and the CYA stuff that comes in from those fragmented delivery structures? I think there's a huge opportunity. And this isn't for every project, right? Design build isn't for every project. There's projects that, just have different structures that traditional design or design bid build is going to be what they do. Developer projects and that it's not for everything, right? A lot of my work was in healthcare and higher ed. Those were the prime markets where you have owners who were building, the repeat builders, they're maintaining their facilities for a long time, and there's an evolution of a lot of those sites that are ongoing. But I think, we go back and look at how that works. And I already forgot what you started saying. I started talking. I forgot what the original question is now. I went on that tangent.
Well, no, it's a mark of a bad question because I spoke for, 30 sentences. But the question essentially is like, from an architect standpoint,
Oh, the less, yeah.
yeah, kind of the design intent versus like constructability from the GC going upstream.
Yeah, I think this idea of, having the design professional focus on design intent and less of constructability shouldn't really be seen less about giving up opportunity, but focusing on the opportunity to do do what your expertise is in, right?
Yeah.
If you're an architect, you're a mechanical engineer, you're going to focus on design, you're going to focus on sustainability, you're going to focus on performance, you're going to focus on that environment that you're creating. Do you want to spend all day drawing casework details to the nth degree that a millwork manufacturer isn't going to use, right? If you're a mechanical engineer, do you want to focus on achieving the performance of that system, or do you want to route ductwork all day and worry about where there's a pipe and this and that? No, we have trade partners who are, I think so much of the work that you see is when you get shop drawings in, it's just a redundant effort on what you did in your contract documents that are different that you
Yeah.
still have to go through and improve. Why not take all that redundancy out of the process and bring those partners in early, use their knowledge to inform your design and let them do the work that they're best suited to do. And those are
Mm.
huge opportunities, right? I mean, that's where I've seen benefits, and it hasn't been about, reducing one profession's scope over the other. It's bringing alignment to what each one of those do best and partnering and understanding the best outcomes to achieve the goals.
Yeah, I think that's well said. And I think it makes sense then also why there's a focus around BIM VDC kind of within that model of collaboration, because in theory you're creating that common data environment, that single source of truth where the site team can benefit from that collaboration, right?
Yeah.
So within that maybe role, is there, and maybe this is a question I can answer myself, but like, does the design build contract structure provide guardrails around BIM delivery?
It does today. It does not.
Okay.
We have a BIM exhibit document that was intended to be attached to it's an exhibit to the general conditions, but it's pretty outdated. But I can say that we are in process of rewriting it right now. Right? DBIA, we have a VDC committee, and we are in process right now of working with the contracts committee to update it. And our real goal there is about, because it's design build and all we have to worry about is design build, we have the opportunity to set inherent and, immediate reliability on the model, right? This model's going to, there will be a model created, right? We know pretty much everybody's doing that. But because we're all there at the outset, let's discuss how are we going to use that model? What's it going to be created for? Who needs to use it downstream? What does the owner need? And who on the team is going to provide it? So this opportunity to have the right people on the bus at the right time in design build really plays a big role there. And now we're able to say, this is what we're going to do on the project. And it's not about, okay, this is what the architect or engineer is going to do to deliver construction documents, and just say, well, the paper was my deliverable, and have somebody come in afterwards and, if they do get a model, not really understand how it was created, what it could be used for, is it trustworthy? But if you're sitting there across the table from your partner on the project, and you can define that, that's a huge opportunity for success. I think the other side of that, kind of, we went back to design intent and constructability. You also have the opportunity to reduce the overlap and redundancy. Think about how many things, in the past in a model, the architect has a light fixture, the electrical engineer has a light fixture, the interior designer may have a separate light fixture somewhere because they're doing more of a visualization thing, or they're doing photogrammics, something, that's actually tracking that. The electrical subcontractor is going to put something in for coordination because a design professional maybe just had a box that's 2 inches high, and we really know that if it's an incandescent light, that can's how deep and it's going to hit something else. Which one's right? Why don't we take advantage of the teams that are putting these things together, get them on the same page, and try to only do it once? Not have multiple things that contradict one another. Well, which one's the source of truth?
Yeah. What a strange concept. Only having to draw once and coordinate once. Yeah, it's interesting. So when you look at maybe the state of BIM from your association seat, like one maybe two questions. One would be like, how do you measure success of your ability to, I imagine, kind of push the ball forward in just kind of, is it BIM adoption, or is it maybe the effectiveness of BIM within design build contracts? How do you, let's just focus on
Yeah.
your impact.
Well, I think some of the opportunity and the impact, it's hard to measure, right? Because we don't have direct control over any firm or company or organization and how they're delivering. But I think with all of the best practices that we put out, all of the education that we put out, the content and deliverables that we have that are people accessing, I think we see a significant increase in people's gravitation towards the BIM VDC technology conversation. We see that in, the articles and blogs that we author. We see that in the attendance at webinars. We see that in the downloads of podcasts. And we see that in the gravitation towards the amount of vendors that we have, technology vendors that we have at our annual event. We've spun up a separate pre-conference workshop. in the VDC Leadership Exchange, which is growing. We're getting ready to do that for the third year this year. I think this year we're in process of actually reviewing the abstracts and proposals that came in for the conference, and just over 25% of them had technology as a key aspect to them, which is pretty exciting. So over the last 3 years, I think we've seen a growth in that way. And I also think, well, we can't really say what's the measure of success on projects. I think one of the things that we are seeing is more and more of our partners are coming around and saying, hey, they're starting to measure that success. Hey, this was a design build job and this is what we did on it and this was the ROI. So being able to share that from our membership to the rest of the membership is really valuable. We had one of the things that I have the opportunity to do, which is great, is we have these leveraging VDC and design build sessions that we do. And, I've had the opportunity to travel and be out in our different regions and local chapters. And that gives us the opportunity to go to, whatever city and bring in some of our partners. We're getting ready to do one in Norfolk for our Hampton Roads chapter. We just did one at the Southeast Region Conference. I was back in Austin after you and I connected at our Southwest Region Conference. And
Nice.
That's me kind of going out and saying, hey, at the Design Build Institute of America, this is where we see the opportunity to leverage BIM, VDC, and technology in this project delivery model. And here's an architect or an engineer. Here is a design builder. Here is a trade partner. Here's an owner, and bringing together a panel of them to each present their unique aspect of where they're seeing the opportunity and talk. That engagement becomes really valuable to listen and understand where the successes are and find those opportunities to bring back to the membership and say, this is the ROI that people are seeing.
When you're pitching kind of BIM and the value, because my day job is via Technic and we provide BIM VDC services, and I wonder if we have the same feeling at times, which is when you go and talk to someone about how BIM can deliver really quality outcomes on their project, it can feel like you're pitching them like mobile phone technology as like this net new thing, right? And it's like, yeah, like I've got a phone, like I kind of get it. But then you dig into it and you're like, well, if you're not getting value from it, there's something wrong,
Yeah.
right? And are you using the design intent model and that's leading to a flawed coordination process? But do you feel like that at times? Like we're talking about something that is like a previous chapter in a book?
Yeah, I think a little bit, but I think that's also, you still have to we're still pulling the industry along, right? I mean, there's a lot of people who still look at, I use software XYZ to produce my construction documents. I do BIM. Well,
Yeah,
not really, right? That's
right.
not the goal and the intent of what you're doing. You just transition one software to the other to produce your same deliverable. Your culture hasn't changed, your process hasn't changed. You're still doing the same thing just with a different tool. So I think that's where the gap is. But if a lot of your work is being done as design bid build, there really isn't. What's the incentive for you to do things differently in that framework? It's not the same. It's just not the same idea.
It's interesting. I did a fair bit of plan and spec work. Not only, was there no requirement, right? We've talked a lot about, just performing on what their contractual requirements are. But if you're asking me to budget things that aren't in the contract, then am I going to be the most competitive, especially if it's price-based award? And in those cases, again, there's an implied warranty that the architect or the owner is transitioning, or sorry, the owner is owning with those plans and specs that they're giving to the contractor to go build. So there's really no incentive for, say, in those instances, for me to go and spend that money. And I guess you could say, full transparency, to everyone, I didn't do a ton of jobs that had a BIM requirement. And, for the new construction, we absolutely did. But, a lot of the things we were doing were medical renovations. And that was with inaccurate as-builts, right? So we basically had to go as-built the facility to then, especially if some of the stuff was fast-tracked, like we never even had time to do this stuff, right? We're sort of building it while flying it. But I want to go back to something because I think, one of the things that I was always massively interested was ROI. You talked about ROI, right? And, immediately, some of the things that jump out to me, not so much specific to BIM, but I want to get there so listeners can understand. But it's like, well, what are those KPIs associated with the ROI? What can we measure?
Mm-hmm.
And how are you helping contractors measure that ROI, especially if they're first time users or unsophisticated owner? And some of the things that come into my mind are the difference between leading and lagging indicators. Because if we can only measure an ROI, say at the end, is it like, sorry, we're already on to the next 16 jobs. So how are we measuring success up front so that people are seeing true value and that the market is being educated while they're still dealing with 1,000 other problems, right?
Yeah. I think one of the things that's hard about that is because you always look at what was the original, ROI, right? We saw architects, engineers gravitating towards building these models, and it was my documents were coordinated, supposedly, and until they started breaking the chain and doing things elsewhere, right? But then, I think when contractors came on board, that's where we really started seeing an ROI, right? And it was clash detection was the big thing, but it was also what's my cost, what's my ROI of something that didn't happen, which is tough to quantify. But now I think people are looking more at, schedule efficiency, right? If they're able to simulate something, how are they saying, hey, we're able to reduce our construction schedule by this? If we prefab something, we're able to reduce our construction schedule by this. If we look at this material versus this material, or we look at this unit versus this unit, we're getting rid of, we're increasing, our opportunity to not get hit with supply chain issues. We have better performing things. So I think it's all now starting to be things that chip away on the front end that realize benefits at the end. We're saying, hey, these are the things that we can do to prevent issues down the road.
So how much of what you just described is still the project executive or the project manager or the superintendent's sort of intellectual property versus the software running not just clash detection, but to what I heard you say, whether it's schedule logic, hey, we can compress this, hey, we have this opportunity for materials over here. Like how does the stuff you're touching and seeing and dare I say improving and like trying to change the industry, how much of it is it helping accelerate my team? Is it helping accelerate and give them more knowledge to ultimately grease the skids so when they're out there, literally everyone knows exactly what they're doing?
I think a lot of it says, here are the opportunities, but it's about how are people implementing it. And I think one of the biggest hurdles to get to that ROI is that do you have an internal BIM team or a VDC team, or do you have somebody on a project working alongside you? Or do you have those people enabled their peers on the projects to use the tool in a way that's allowing them to do that? As a BIM or VDC person, right, you're in a reactionary mode most of the time. I need help with this. Can you build something of this? We're stuck here. How do we advance this using technology? I found a huge opportunity when I was at Astorino, when I was at Canon Design, even in my roles before that at a smaller firm, being able to be on projects and have that firsthand experience and engage with my colleagues and say, this is how you use it on your project. If you're relying on somebody to come after the fact and do it, that's not advancing the
you're
project,
missing it.
right?
You're missing that
So
opportunity.
that idea of IP, if I'm a scheduler, I'm the cost estimator, how do we empower them to use the tool, right? Somebody's got to go out and research it. Somebody's got to figure out the process. Somebody's got to train on it. But how do we empower them to use those things so these goals can be realized and these KPIs can be realized? That's where the opportunity lies. I think that's where one of the big, people and cultural barriers lie on projects. Oh, we're going to have somebody write a BIM execution plan. Oh, we're going to bring Lars in to do clash detection because we just got the first round of models, and maybe we'll get them later on to figure out what it is. No, somebody has to understand how to use these things so they can actually implement them on their work.
And it integrated into the daily routine of the project.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, at a workflow level. And I think
Yeah.
that's a thing, and I think that doesn't happen unless you're integrated at the project, and then that doesn't happen unless you have a culture of appreciating that the end result of BIM should be something being used in the field to execute better, right? And I think at times there's a disconnect of I've got a pretty model, but I don't necessarily know how to translate that to field execution. And so I think that's an interesting point.
Well, and that's where you see that evolution of going from design to pre-construction to field execution, but also having that data gathering then to move it even further downstream and give an owner something that's useful. Like we said, it's not that there's a lot of owners, we're starting to see that transition, that evolution, like large institutional owners, colleges, healthcare, maybe government agencies, anybody with a large real estate portfolio starting to look at what that is. But a lot of them might just say, give me a BIM, or I want a digital twin, or whatever, whatever buzzword they want to put in there, but they don't really have a way of using it. It's the same sort of thing when you get there. It's just incremental. There's opportunities, but how do I apply it to my business?
Right, so that's that sort of actualization, right? That integration, like how do I get that ROI, but how do I measure it up front so that I'm like just amazed while I'm using it and sort of doubling down. And speaking from personal experience, the things that we implemented, integrated, we were hyper focused on that ROI while using it, and then seeing like either we're going to make this part of our DNA, or we're going to get rid of this quickly because it's just a distraction. These guys, no, we don't need distractions.
Well, and that's so many people go into a technology adoption saying, well, why were you doing BIM in the first place? Because everybody else was. I needed to be competitive. But what problem were you trying to solve in your business, right?
We don't have a problem. What are you talking about?
We're perfect, right? Yeah, but it's like you can't measure an ROI if you're not saying, hey, this is my challenge. What am I measuring against? Right. That's where as an industry we're not so good about doing things.
But so that's where I feel like there's that that ROI like pull. Listen. Obviously, the big, great companies with their BIM integrators, coordinators, the tech departments, right? They can measure this stuff. But I was sort of thinking, it's just like, what are the companies that aren't using it? What's the size? What type of projects are they doing it, right? And then it's like, how can you pull a Wizard of Oz, show them what's behind the curtain, say this is the opportunity, right? If this is the pain, speaking from a software standpoint, it's do you experience this pain? If you do, we should have a conversation. If you don't, keep doing it the way you're doing it.
Well, and I can remember, I'm sure probably still happens, right? What size project is too small for me to do in BIM, right?
Yeah.
Well, why would you want to do things 4 different ways? Well, I'm going to do it this way on this project. I'm going to do it this way on this project. I'm going to do it this way over here. Don't you want to create a well-defined process and set of tools that you use to move all of your designs forward regardless of size?
So, love it. The only challenge is, well, what happens if I'm doing like a $500,000 like little TI over here versus a $25 million, call it new Herman Chevrolet, right? It's like my new auto, they're different projects. I can't budget that from an overhead standpoint and cost GCs on that one, but this one, absolutely. So that would be my only comment to that.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, quality should still be measured the same. Safety should still be measured the same. Like, what can that project handle from like stacking things on that ad cost versus SOPs in measuring risk, quality, safety, things like that.
And I think that goes back to, do the people working on the project understand how to use the technology in a process-oriented way to do it, or are you having to worry about funding somebody, the BIM guy, to come onto the project? Well, I can't afford to do this. Well,
the tech guy, who really has no idea what's going on the job, right?
Don't make it an overhead thing.
And just to clarify, if the BIM guy is via Technic, very much okay with you spending that money. Everyone who's listening, please continue to hire the BIM guy. But I think the point is, like, you need people who understand the field to be interacting with your BIM process. And higher than that BIM element needs to be integrated into your project delivery.
Yeah.
And so I think whether or not you're having an internal resource play that role or an external resource, they have to bring that culture and match that culture if it's not there. That I think is a valid point. I think the other maybe point to be made is, I don't know if this is controversial or not, but I think there is a quantity of like performative BIM happening, which is essentially.
What's performative BIM?
I mean, I think I might edit this out myself, but I think it's this idea of, we are doing BIM because we're a big contractor and it's a big project and there's an expectation we'll do BIM. And I think there's a return in value in that. But there's in that environment, and obviously I'm speaking lots of generalities, but in that kind of instance, there's a lot of value being left on the table.
That was the comment Brian made earlier, right? Well, my competition's doing it, so I have to.
Right.
Which goes back to, well, do they know how to measure if what they're implementing and experimenting with is actually making an impact in their organization or not? Are they educated enough to know how to harness all the great that can come out of it?
I also think an input into the conversation has to be that our expectations of project delivery is just way too low, right? If we think success is a 4.5% margin on a job, then none of us are thinking well enough about what we should be going after, right? Like as an investor, when I'm looking at Bitcoin that does 65% year over year for the last 15 years, that's the hurdle rate for capital potentially, depending on how comfortable you are with that kind of asset class. But in construction, for whatever reason, we're all comfortable with 4.5% margins. Like, I think as AI technology, as that comes into our market, I think that ceiling is going to be raised, and it's going to open up people's eyes to there's a ton of margin that we've been leaving on the table, and the only way to capture it is actually in a BIM integrated project delivery.
I agree, and I think that was one of the things I loved about the firm when I joined Astorino was that it was all this all-in-one, one-stop shop. Right? I was excited because I saw what my engineers were doing. I saw what opportunities I was seeing and how builders were starting to use our models. And now I had the opportunity to be part of that. And I also see different, like, especially on the mechanical plumbing side, where you start to see that integrated firm, right? Where there's engineering and fabrication all in one house. And how do you start streamlining that as somebody on a team? I always kind of scratch my head why we don't see more of that integration moving forward, because that's where those opportunities are to reduce that effort, but have that collaborative delivery and have that approach where you're in a sole source environment. Granted, it's still discipline specific and you have to bring people together, but there's so much waste in that process. Why are we not taking advantage of that and learning what the other parties need? It's that being able to repeat that work and be like, hey, I understand this. I understand this is a higher approach to what we're delivering.
Sorry, Lars, go ahead. I feel like I interrupted you twice already.
I desire nothing more than contractors to make more money. It is a very hard industry, and if you look around, literally, you walk outside, contractors build everything around us, and it's just, I think, the real problem with how, one, we do it to ourselves, right? Well, the guy down the street can do it, $10,000 cheaper than you, right? It's like, what the heck, there's that one. But I think there's just this owner expectation. That's the market, right? And and this might be interesting. This might be a good segue to, I think, more or less what may be a boring conversation, but it's contract structure, right? And so, like, there's GMPs, right? So, listen, when an owner only wants to pay 3%, they're going to find someone to take the job for 3%. But
somebody will do it.
Someone will do it. Someone will always do it, right? But I do really like and it's really interesting hearing your experience at your previous firm. I'm not going to say the name of it correctly, but the integrated, architect, engineer, builder. And I know some other companies here in town that sort of have that structure, but, layer on purchasing, there's to your point, Brian, there's so much waste in this entire chain. It's nuts, right? It's nuts. I get it. But I do believe we are on that cusp of massive, massive improvements in that workflow, and something, Stephen, you and I have talked about, which is, our concern is all the companies that are going to be left behind because they're not paying attention to how quickly the tech is improving things for them, thus improving margin for them.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting, maybe just go back to Astorino. Like, what are some of the ingredients there, just looking back? Like, were they able to focus on specific project types and really get good at isolating variables within those project types? Or
Yeah, good question.
what do you think were some of the variables to success there?
I mean, they were already doing it by the time I got there. But I think
Brian supercharged it.
what's
Sorry,
that?
keep going. I just said you supercharged it. They were
Yeah,
doing it, but then
supercharged it. Well, I think it was what I think was interesting is the it was the people, right? It was the opportunity for people to do jobs again and understand those lessons learned and evolve them. And as it grew, it started to engage more people. And it was having that mindset shift of understanding that it wasn't the architect being told to do something by the mean builder, right? I need you to do this. And I can remember an instance where the guy he was the project architect. He went into my boss's office and he was like, oh, Lauren wants me to do this. And he's like, all right. He's like, well, it's going to take me like, 2 days to do that. And it's like, well, how much, what's the value to Lauren? He's like, oh, well, if we do that, we can save this, this, and this. He's like, so go do it. He's like, our paycheck comes from the same person, right? That's not somebody else. It's not you giving up work. That's you doing something to make your teammate and your colleague more efficient, right? And it was like seeing that kind of evolution of like, having somebody who had this vision and continuing to say, this is the opportunity, right? This is why we're doing this. We're all on the same team. We're doing this. Yeah, we might spend more money in design, but we're realizing that opportunity in construction, and we're getting the building in the owner's hands earlier and at a lower rate and a higher performance and all of these things. So there's a different focus on the goals. It's not, I'm the architect or I'm the engineer, and this is impacting my deadline only. So go pound salt, right? It's like, no, we are a team trying to drive this. And as a team, your extra effort here is going to pay a significant dividend down the road to the team.
So the light bulb might have just gone on for me, right? That experience in that firm, you saw the success of, extreme collaboration, right? All rowing, same cadence, same boat, same target. And that's what you feel, and frankly, me too, but like that's what can be. That's the structure we desire, right? Powerful. Very cool.
And I think even in that effort, and I go back to this, which is crazy. It's like this was 2012 to 2014. We did this project. I mean, we minimized the amount of drawings we had, right? We had a focused goal of produce the documents to get our permit and our AHJ review. And again, this was senior leadership driving this top-down approach. And this was, my boss, Ron Delaria was kind of led our construction group. He was a principal. He understood the impact of BIM and VDC. He was driving that in the organization. And we'd go out to the job site and we set a different level of expectation. So we'd have the metal framer come out and say, hey, where's all the, we didn't have fully dimensioned floor plans. We just dimensioned whatever we need to get our permitting, exiting, egress, the whole thing. Where the thing? Put it where it's at in the model. Like what? This was 2013 when construction was starting, right? End of 2012, 2013. Yeah. It's in the model. Put it there. Plumbing guys come in. Well, we need a, laid out. We put it there in the model. But the person doing the work had that intention. They understood that that's what they needed to do to help the project progress. Mm-hmm. And as designers, they were, that's where you started to mitigate all of that CYA detailing that an architect and an engineer do. Bring in the trade partner. This is the profile I want where the curtain wall meets the metal panel and how it's hanging off the slab edge. This is what I want it to look like. Can we even do that? Oh yeah, we can do it, but we have to do this. Okay, go release you to do it in your shop drawings. And I'm just going to show the profile and put a note on it and says, see this, because we had a collaborative team and partners on board early, and it allowed us to take advantage of everybody's collective expertise, and there was a trust and a reliability that what we were putting in the model and what the other team member were doing, we were all on the same page from the outset. And that experience was really valuable, and seeing how technology guided that was huge.
So what are the constraints now? Obviously, we've pointed to a few of these kind of throughout the conversation, but as we look at, and I kind of wrote about this recently, but like BIM adoption is high, right? A very large clip of projects engage in BIM, and I think all in those projects, maybe some of them kind of fall in the performative kind of category that I created, but I think a lot of them too are seeing value, maybe just not to the extent that we wrote about in the early 2000s. But what are the constraints for the projects that are doing average variety of BIM, which is a poor way to describe it, but versus maybe the way in which you just described Astorino was kind of operating its business? What are the variables there that we can isolate and change.
I think when you look at the people who were, just doing it, I'm trying to remember, there's a quote. It was Barbara White Bryson. Do you remember the book, The Owner's Dilemma?
I know the name of it.
Well, you guys talk about that in DBI, in the DBIA course, right? I think you guys did.
There might be, but there's a
Yes.
quote that she has in there, and it says, BIM is the opportunity for and I'm gonna kill it, right? The only thing I remember is the last part, very succinctly, right? BIM is this opportunity for people who are focused on a collaborative delivery model as opposed to the sanctity of drawings. And I think that is the start point. And I think this whole evolution of things starts with the design professional. And so many times it becomes, hey, I make this model, performative BIM. We used to call it Hollywood BIM, right? Oh, I did a model and I got renderings and I maybe took some floor plans out of it or whatever, back in the day. But are we using that just to be some sort of foundational thing to lay out our drawings, and we're still working in the same old ways? That's why people don't want to share information, because they know they all bastardized the model.
Yeah,
the drawings are all bastardized versions of the model that have 2D stuff all over the top of it to get the story out. They say, well, the model really wasn't built for that, because I don't want to turn it over to you because I know what I had to do to get the drawings out. But at the same time, the drawings were their contracted deliverable. So it creates an inherent break in the process. What are we creating? How do we get to that collaborative delivery when we're still getting paid to produce drawings? Everything we do is based on drawings. That's the problem the industry has.
Is it an interpretation? I want to talk about just like that alone. Is it the interpretation of like, well, if I hand you this and it's wrong, you're going to come after me, right? Is that in plain English? You think? Is that the risk?
It's different than what's in the documents that you bid on. That's not in the right spot. Ooh, yeah, I got down the last minute. I had to hide that drawing over here, right?
Yeah.
Or you're going to find something that I didn't do, or, I got this thing off to the side. Well, my quantity was a bust because of the model. Well, yeah, you shouldn't use that because that was on a different work set, or this, that, and the other thing with the technology. But we don't have the opportunity to communicate those things with people. It's all we're in those traditional delivery models. It's always split and you're off to the side, and all right, there it is. Well, good luck. My contract was to give her construction drawings, and she gave them to you to build from. So, right, it's that transactional.
It's very transactional, not collaborative
environment that we have in the traditional way we do things.
It's a step process, and and then a lot of time owners don't hire the architect to do, say, construction admin in those instances too. So then it just gets worse.
Yep.
How do you think AI will influence kind of BIM VDC workflows? This is like the $15 question that you can sound
50?
smart asking.
Only 50?
Yeah.
Yeah, because anyone can ask it.
The question that everybody asks at a conference and nobody has an answer for.
Yeah. Shoot from the hip, Brian.
Right?
Give me go wild.
I mean, are architects even going to exist in 2 years?
Yeah, of course they are. Of course they are, right?
For the listeners, my face was joking. There you go.
I mean, my favorite, so I was at a conference, a Suffolk conference, Suffolk Health conference that Autodesk was participating in, and it was about like AI and design. And Autodesk got up to this big presentation. I guess I'm going to say this, and we're never going to get sponsored by Autodesk, but Autodesk essentially like went up and was like, we're going to do generative design, like parametric, like all of these words. And at the end of it, John Fish kind of went up and was like, today we do not have geometrically accurate drawings. And until we have that, that is the frontier. I was like, mic drop, and then like the conference ended. It was great.
Next topic.
Well, I think the challenge, so 2 comments on that, right? One, I mean, when people in the industry, our industry, talk about AI, they get all wrapped around the axle about ChatGPT stealing all of their intellectual property and things like that. Is that we see that, and we see all the generative, crap that comes out of it, right? All the fancy little swoopy pictures that says our built environment is going to look exactly the same, because that's what these generative models put out when you say architecture or, all that stuff. It's just like, okay, that's not it. One of the things that was interesting, 2 years ago, we had Phil Bernstein did our keynote for our VDC Leadership Exchange at the DBIA conference. And he talked about that, right? He's like, people, it's got to be an assistant. It's got to be something that helps you do your work and come up with things or pull things and, mitigate the waste that you do in your process. And he was like, oh, I told, ChatGPT or Dolly or whatever app it was. He's like, build me a library. And he's like, this is garbage, right? He's like, no, build a library that does this. And he like went through this iteration of asking it. He's like, this is all crap. He's like, I can't use any of this. This didn't help me do anything. This has no institutional knowledge of what it is. He's like, is it going to get better? Yeah. Are there opportunities to do things? He's like, but we're not focusing on really on the right things, right? And then he was showing some of these other apps that like, how do we deal with code compliance? How is this impacting us from a safety perspective? How are we using AI from a quality control and quality assurance process? How are we looking at it from, data mining our work or, reviewing our contracts for risk mitigate? There's all these opportunities that I don't think are ever really come top of mind to people. And they focus on ChatGPT or writing their emails or, oh, my son at college does XYZ with it to do his homework. And
Yeah.
I don't think there's a true realization of what the power of these things are. And there's a aversion to say, well, I'm not going to have the computer tell me what to do. We had that at one of our conferences. There was an app. It was an app that was based on Transcend. They worked in the water wastewater market, and you plug in all your criteria for performance from an owner, and it's a generative design thing that puts out models, and it's an early iterative optioneering tool. And the challenge in some of those contracts are an engineer has to come back with maybe 2 or 3 options for an owner as part of that review process. And now they're saying, hey, we're going to get thousands, but what are all the crazy things that you or I never would have thought of? Well, why did it put that next to that? And why is that here? And why did it size it this way? And you start dissecting some of these things that are the ideal solutions, and you probably come up with something you didn't have. And you might have more iterations to show somebody. But I can remember at the end of the conference, somebody came up and said, will you expect me to stamp what the computer put out? And it was like the most deflating, like we're already 2 minutes past the end of the session comment on a presentation. And it's like, there's still risk is front and center of everything, right? I'm not going to trust what that computer gave me. You still have to have that human to understand
Yes.
and use all of their institutional knowledge to validate or dismiss what it put out and be like, oh, I never thought of that. That's interesting. What if I did this and this and this instead of that, which is what I originally thought of, or my preconceived notion of what a solution would be.
I think what you just said is really the key to where that sort of, we'll call it design AI is currently, which is quickly producing 13 options. And
Yeah.
you're like, oh no, I like this, I like this, I like this, I like this. One tool that I've experimented with is called Zenerate. And in the multifamily space, it's, lot size dimensions, standoff distances, you add in some code, and it's spitting out models extremely fast on, best case is for, maximizing or hey, what's the right unit mix and ideal unit size on, studio 1, 2, 3s. And then it can include rough performance. And in that space, the idea is that how many concepts can I put in front of investors as quickly as possible to drum up energy and like, these guys are moving fast. I appreciate that because very quickly you can kind of see like, oh, this works or that doesn't. All right, now let's roll up our sleeves. Let's go hire, the guy we always hire and off we go. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think to your point, Brian, like I think we all think about things from our own kind of set of paradigms, right? And I think there does seem to be this kind of heavy weighting of I'm either grounded in my current paradigm and I can't open my eyes to what the future is going to be, or the other side of that, which is like the future is going to look like nothing like we've seen right now, and so I'm going to forecast even beyond what is possible. And I do think though, trying to, and it's an impossible question, but like trying to map out AI's impacts on construction, it's akin to asking, an engineer in the early 1800s how electricity was going to influence like his day-to-day workflow, right? Like it's just going to impact us in ways we can't even think it's going to, and it's already it's already beginning to do that in some ways, right?
Yeah.
So yeah.
I would say, yeah, we have to understand that it's there. We have to begin to interact with it and understand what it can do. And we all have to continue to learn, right? It's a continuous improvement thing, right? How do we keep all these things are coming at us? How do we use that to apply to our business to make us more efficient and more effective? And there's
So
significant productivity opportunities at the most basic things. When you look at how you can get into some of the apps that are out there now and just find information and have that, what was air handler one? Boom, here's everything that's associated with air. Nobody's going to look through that in the specs, the drawings, the shop drawings, the engineer's drawings. It's huge at a
yeah,
basic level.
yeah, I think fixing the search for information problem alone is promising, right? And I know Trunk Tools is working on a couple things,
Yep.
and a couple others are. So one of the things, and we're running out of time. I want to be sensitive to your time, Brian. One of the questions we do like to ask is, as you look to your career, if you were to start all over again, what would be the advice to your younger self, kind of coming into the industry?
I saw that on your list that you had on there, and I think it's kind of a tricky one. I think my knee-jerk reaction is always, should I have gone into construction? Should I gone into construction
You're the
management
first one
Just
who
stop.
said that. Good
Yeah.
job. Good,
at the
good, good
beginning,
answer.
right? So, based
Hey,
on what I
all
know
young
now,
listeners, earmuffs for a second.
should I have done that? At the same time, why change where I got to, right? The experiences that I've had, the ups and downs, and the how my career meandered and moved through. I think there was a really unique opportunity. I think for where I'm at now, the opportunity to see where the industry was and the adoption of technology and the transformation from 2D to 3D that I got to experience was
Mm.
was pretty awesome. And being able to be at a point and gravitate towards that when I did, fairly early on. All of those experiences leading up to now, I wouldn't have those, right? If I just said, "Oh, I'm going to go into BIM and do all this in the early 2000s," well, I wouldn't have had the experience that I had on projects. I wouldn't have had the
Yeah.
experiences to be on a job site and see things and have that, kind of career goal. So, not to say that nothing's perfect, right? But I think those opportunities were really valuable in what it is.
All
Dude,
that.
that might be one of the best answers. So
I thought you were going to make
your
fun of me
nephew
for
says,
saying I wouldn't change anything.
so your nephew comes to you and says, "I want to be an architect." What are you telling him?
Yeah, there's lots of opportunities.
My dad always told me, there's easier ways to make a living, but there is something that, again, you walk outside and you're like, some hardworking people build all this stuff, and these are
Well,
good people.
Mm.
and I think regardless, if you go into, whatever discipline you go into, I think that's what's great about the building industry is there's so many opportunities for you to leverage that knowledge. Whatever you did in college or whatever you did at the beginning of the career, everything you learn applies to some other aspect of it, right? And you have a unique opportunity to, see how can I share my knowledge to better the industry. I still love the built environment. I
Yeah.
still appreciate architecture. That just
Yeah.
wasn't as my career evolved, that wasn't where my skill set lied. That wasn't how I could make the industry better. Now I'm in a
Yeah.
spot where I can use my skills and knowledge to try to push the industry forward. And I wouldn't have planned. I thought I was going to be designing buildings when I, started my first year in college and when I graduated what I thought I was going to do, but I was able
Yeah.
to take all those experiences and hopefully do something value for the industry with it and do something I love.
Well, and I think you can't really spend too much time in the industry without growing an appreciation for it, or at least
Mhm.
a respect for it, right? To your point, Lars, like there's just some innovative, hardworking folks. And I think, the passion as you go through your career increasingly becomes like, how do you give back to make it easier as an industry? Because I've got boys and I'd love for them to end up in construction, not necessarily the path I chose. But in some ideal future state where the industry isn't as it is today, that would be ideal. That'd be great for them. So we'll see. Let's make that future. Brian, this was fun. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Enjoyed the conversation with you both.
Thank you.
Lars, any closing thoughts?
No, I totally appreciate. Honestly, I think this ending and sort of how you answered that question is a testament to how transparent you've been and also how genuine you are. And I think, I know we didn't get too much into it and we talked a little bit about it, but DBIA, great organization. So for the listeners, what exactly is your role at DBIA?
So my title is Director of Virtual Design and Construction. Oh, that's, yeah, everybody's got a Director of Virtual Design and Construction, but really so DBIA focuses on the development and sharing of best practices for design build done right? That's our elevator pitch, right? We want to be able to promote that collaborative delivery model. So for me, it's how do we leverage technology, BIM, how do we leverage processes like VDC and all those adjacent tools to help drive further efficiency, productivity, and optimized outcomes in design build, right? So we kind of adapted VDC done right? We want to be able to develop those best practices, share all those experiences for the betterment of the industry so they can apply it and move it forward.
And I'll say, those best practices are fantastic documents. Some of the education opportunities that DBIA has, the templates you guys have, those made an impact in my company. And I would highly encourage, if you are doing design build work, plug into DBIA.
Yeah.
It will help your team, and it'll level up the organization in terms of those best practices. And really, I think the key word is how to collaborate properly, and how to get out of the old mindset and a new mindset. Whether it's BIM, whether it's BDC, it's just how to collaborate. And I think that, to me, from a DBIA standpoint, was very impactful. And I think it's a great organization that has a lot to share and is continuing to make the industry better. How can people hit you up on LinkedIn, or what's the best
Yeah,
way?
you can find me on LinkedIn. You can follow us at dbia.org. Feel free to reach out. If any of your listeners have any questions, they can reach out. We can share where those best practice documents are online. And we got a conference coming up in November, which will be a lot of great presentations about how people are actually executing this in real world. So
Good.
Yeah,
Love it. Thanks,
fantastic.
more
Brian.
great stories to share.
Yep.
All right. Thanks, man.